Welcome to the second National Parks Subcommittee hearing of the 117th Congress. As we have seen over the last 15 months of the COVID pandemic, our public spaces have become important spaces for refuge and where we can recharge our batteries. Today we will consider a number of bills that would designate and protect for future use important spaces across our country. We have 14 bills on the agenda today that cover a wide range of topics and geographic areas. Together, they seek to preserve our national history, change the way we manage public lands, and provide additional recreational opportunities. I won't speak on each of them individually, but I want to say that while some are likely to garner wide bipartisan support, others have raised concerns on either or both sides of the aisle. It is my belief that this subcommittee should have an opportunity to discuss bills, even those bills that I might oppose. I'd like to turn to a bill using the chairman's prerogative that I've introduced with Senator Collins, the York River Wild and Scenic River Act. This bill is also supported by Maine's House delegation. The bill would designate a portion of the York River as a wild and scenic river, protecting an important part of our state and many important historical sites from future development. This bill has been a long time in the making, and frankly, it's one of the most grassroots initiatives that I've ever been involved with. Beginning in 2009, a locally based Friends of the York River group made up of residents, town leaders, and others interested in river conservation led the effort to determine whether designation of a wild and scenic river was an appropriate way to recognize and protect the York River. The group held public meetings and collected letters of support from the 4 adjacent communities. My House colleague, Representative Shelley Pingree, and I introduced the York River Wild and Scenic Study Bill. It was included in the fiscal year 2015 National Defense Authorization Act. The study committee then began their work in partnership with local stakeholders. The study committee focused on designation as a partnership wild and scenic river, given management models of other local rivers nearby in New Hampshire and Connecticut. The study committee identified a number of outstanding, remarkable natural, recreational, and cultural resource values associated with the study area that they concluded made it eligible for designation. Anyone who has visited the York River designation watershed in southern Maine notes the incredible landscape that the towns of York, South Berwick, Kittery, and Elliott have in their backyards. I'm honored to have Jennifer Hunter here to share with the subcommittee the uniqueness of the area and why we should designate it as part of the Wild and Scenic River system. One procedural note before I recognize Ranking Member Daines. Following his remarks, I will recognize members of the committee who wish to make a statement about their bills on the agenda, followed by any members not on the committee seeking to make a statement. From there, we will go on to the rest of our witnesses and then on to questions. Also, without objection, all members may submit letters of support or opposition or additional materials regarding measures on today's agenda. Senator Daines.
Chairman King, thank you. Today's hearing, we're going to examine 15 largely local and parochial bills. This subcommittee has long worked together to examine and pass bills from members both on and off this committee that affect parks and lands in their specific states. As we look at today's agenda, it's important to me to hear about the local support as well as the opposition to each bill. I firmly believe that land use decisions and land designations should have the strong support of community members and the local elected officials who live and work closest to the lands impacted. This isn't always easy, but it's vitally important that we hear from all those affected and take in their feedback. In fact, in Montana, we were able to do that just a few years ago with the East Rosebud Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. As a kid growing up, I spent a lot of time in the East Rosebud. It's a beautiful part of our state coming out of the Absaroka-Beartooth Wilderness. And this particular act targeted and received locally supported agreement to preserve a small but a beautiful portion of a river that took over 4 years to get signed into law after I first introduced it in the House. During that time, we made a number of edits. We improved the bill, and we grew local support and finally got it signed into law. As we go through today's agenda, I hope to work with the chairman to examine the local support as well as the opposition to each bill and take in their feedback as we move forward. I do want to make A quick mention of a few of the bills we have on today's agenda. First, Senate Bill 1771 to officially designate the museum at the Blythefield Eaker Air Force Base as the National Cold War Center. This museum has long been the de facto Cold War center, and I've heard from many community members that they would like to see the name officially recognized. Senate Bill 172 would authorize the establishment of a commemorative work in D.C. to honor the extraordinary acts of valor, selfless service, and sacrifice displayed by Medal of Honor recipients. This bill has bipartisan support, and it's been the priority of a number of members over the past year. I'd also like to hear more about Senate Bill 535, which Senator Ernst will be speaking on today. This bill creates a commemorative work honoring those who have served on active duty in support of the global war on terrorism. Senate Bill 1527, the Parks Road Access Act, would ensure uniform park acceptance of state road access laws. It's my knowledge that current regulations require parks to follow state and local vehicle laws, but that's the case at all parks. I look forward to hearing more. Senate Bill 1354 would designate a National Historic Trail in a study of a proposed 500-mile National Scenic Trail in Alaska. Our historic and scenic trails help increase access to our public lands and drive tourism in local and often remote communities. I look forward to hearing from local communities how this bill will boost their local economies and increase recreation. And finally, I'm interested in hearing more about Senate Bill 192, which would designate 4,700 miles of new wild and scenic rivers in Oregon. This committee has received a lot of correspondence on the bill, both in support as well as in opposition. With that, Mr. Chairman, I turn it back to you. I look forward to a robust discussion and testimony from our witnesses.
Thank you, Senator Daines. I'd like to first call on committee member Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon to discuss the proposal involving his state.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and Senator Daines. We're both Westerners, so we know how Westerners love their treasures. I also want to express my appreciation for allowing Andrea Malberg, a rancher from Union County, Oregon, to testify on our River Democracy Act. And, Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record my remarks. I'm going to keep it brief this morning. Is that acceptable to the Chair?
Without objection.
Great. I'm going to start by entering into the record an October 2020 Grant County economic study co-authored by the City of John Day, which found that outdoor recreation in and around the John Day Wild and Scenic River generates over $11 million per year, and that's in a county with just over 7,000 people. I also want to submit for the record letters from 3 watershed councils, the Rogue, the Malala, and the Upper Deschutes, that support the River Democracy Act and the restoration tools it provides. Mr. Chairman and my colleague, my home state is 3,000 miles from Washington, D.C. And I think, as Senator Daines knows, for Westerners, it often seems like we're even further away. So I have, in my time in public service, always tried to shorten that distance by throwing open the doors of government. I've done that by holding almost 1,000 in-person town meetings, scores more discussion sessions on Zoom and in schools and other community centers, and I call it the Oregon Way. The River Democracy Act is another such effort to listen to the people of my home state in every nook and cranny of Oregon. Oregonians love to discuss our rivers for their beauty, for their cool, clear drinking water, for fishing and rafting, for unmasked salmon and steelhead, unmatched salmon and steelhead, and also because of the huge boost to our recreation economy. So what I have done with this legislation is I've asked Oregonians to give me their ideas and their best suggestions for additional conservation efforts and additional opportunities to protect our rivers. Mr. Chairman and Senator Daines, I don't know of another such effort in the country to go to the people in every part of my state and say, I'm not going to write this bill in Washington, D.C. I'm going to take your ideas and suggestions when you give them to me, And I can tell you they sure did that. The response was overwhelming. In a few months, my office received over 15,000 nominations for rivers and streams that Oregonians felt are worthy of wild and scenic river designations, which produce a bill that would protect nearly 4,700 miles of rivers and streams. So I say to my colleagues, both of whom I work with constantly, talked to Senator King last night about health care. Senator Daines and I put in a big privacy bill, this week, so we work together often. I consider this a fresh approach to legislating because it's not me writing a bill in Washington, D.C. and handing it over to my colleagues and then we talk about it. This bill comes from the people of Oregon, the Oregon way. And the bill represents, for example, nominations from school kids for Tumalo Creek for their science class at the Pacific Crest Middle School in Bend, for Rough and Ready Creek from River Guides in Southern Oregon, and for the Umatilla River and Middle Fork of the John Day by the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. So this is what I thought the future of natural resources policy ought to be about. Empowering people, particularly Westerners, who, as Senator Daines knows, treasure our natural resources and want to use them for multiple purposes, to have a new opportunity to share their views. Now, in addition to protecting rivers and streams, I also felt it was important to take unique steps to protect my communities from the ravages of catastrophic wildfires. And I think my colleagues from the West know how strongly I feel about it, but I know all Westerners do. And you heard me ask Vicki Christensen about the prospect of something unprecedented. I say to my friends from Montana and Utah, we might have multiple fires this fire season across the West. Normally it's Oregon helping Montana and Montana helping Utah, and we all pitch in. This year, we may have, Senator King, we may have multiple big fires at the same time in the West, which is why I asked Vicki Christensen about it. So I thought that this bill, in addition to protecting rivers and streams, this legislation takes unique and extraordinary steps to protect our communities from the ravages of catastrophic wildfires. And I sure wish this bill had been in effect already because of the fire season we're looking at. Now, the way this bill does it is it requires the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management to develop and implement a wildfire risk reduction plan for every river corridor, and the bill ensures thinning and carefully implemented prescribed fires are going to turn these river corridors into fire safety corridors. In addition, the legislation establishes new ways for the Forest Service to work with local fire response teams so that local crews can respond immediately when a fire strikes. So those are the two key provisions, colleagues, in the bill. But we Westerners know that there's some other important issues that go into writing a bill like that. And one of them is protecting private property rights. So to do that, I state on page 16, line 7 of the bill, that nothing in this act or an amendment shall affect private property rights. Right there, page 16 in the bill, private property respected. Same goes for water rights, protected on page 17, line 1 and 10. So I want my colleagues, because I think my friend from Montana said, well, you've been getting some letters. I just want him to know particularly about two of those issues, the protection for private property and water rights. The last point I want to mention is that we know that rivers are a very strong economic engine in Oregon and frankly throughout the West. Outdoor recreation supports well over 200,000 jobs statewide and generates more than $15 billion in consumer spending each year. And so as we add up all of those benefits, the beauty, the drinking water, fishing and rafting, this incredible salmon and steelhead that we're gifted with, and the bonanza of the boost for our economy when we need it, I think it really goes to the heart of what the West really ought to be all about. Now, colleagues, your states may not want to do that. And I get that, and that's what we love about the West, is we're independent. We like trying to carve our own path in policy and governance. But this is, in my view, what our late, great governor of Oregon, Tom McCall, a Republican, I might note, would really think about when he talks about livability and proceeding in a way where you protect 4% of those rivers. 4% of those rivers is wild and scenic, so that during our short time on the earth, we can say we did something to ensure Oregon's special places would be there for our children and our grandchildren, and we got all the benefits today that constitute sound policy. And that's why I felt it was so important to add those unprecedented protections to make sure that we had an added measure of safety against the prospect of wildfire that we know well in the West. Thank you. Thank both my colleagues.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I know we've got to keep this moving forward. Just a brief comment, Senator Wyden. The wildfire risk this season, I think, is extraordinary. I was on a fire line Friday outside of Red Lodge, Montana, where we already have a 30,000-acre fire burning. The Incident Command Center told me that the moisture content in the forest, this moment now in the middle of June, is equivalent to usually we see at the end of August. And it was equivalent to what they saw in 1988, which, of course, were the catastrophic Yellowstone fires that burned 800,000 acres. So we're in for a huge challenge, I think, this season, no doubt in the West, where usually we are sharing resources between states. I think the entire West is going to face challenges perhaps we've not seen in quite some time with wildfires.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just very briefly add on, because Senator Daines and I are very much in agreement on it. And I want my colleague to know that when we get Vicki Christensen's memo about the prospect of multiple fires, big fires, facing all of our communities around the West, I intend to work very closely with my colleague as we have so often. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And as an Easterner, I intend to work with you on this issue as well.
Send us some of your rain.
Yeah. I won't touch that line. Senator Lee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. You know, no one can deny that there are some real treasures that are our public lands. Utahns know this well. And at the outset, it's easy to see why the Antiquities Act would seem like a good means of protecting those treasures. Unfortunately, what was once a relatively narrowly targeted tool now poses a looming danger to our rural communities in Utah. In 1996, President Bill Clinton used the Antiquities Act to create a 1.7 million acre monument in southern Utah. Then in 2016, in the last few weeks of his presidency, President Barack Obama created the 1.3 million acre Bears Ears National Monument. So this is over 3 million acres of my home state that were locked up and heavily restricted within a roughly 20-year time frame. More than 2 Delawares of land put into this designation. For locals, this protection of these lands has come at a really high cost in the form of restrictions on travel, recreation, and economic opportunities. Activists have suggested that Utah's rural communities embrace the tourist economy that tends to come, so they say, with monument designations. Now, while tourism has certainly contributed much to rural Western economies, including that of my own state, communities can't survive on tourism alone, especially when all other industry can be thwarted by those same things. I introduced the Protect Utah's Rural Economy, or PURE Act, to protect Utah from future abuses under the Antiquities Act by prohibiting the president from establishing or expanding a national monument in Utah unless the proposed monument has been authorized by an act of Congress and the state legislature. Congress has twice granted similar protections to other states. Congress first prohibited future monument designations in the state of Wyoming in 1950. Then, more than 30 years later, Congress passed another law requiring congressional approval for any monument designation in Alaska larger than 5,000 acres. At a bare minimum, Utahns deserve the same protections from the Antiquities Act that the people of Alaska and of Wyoming enjoy. Additionally, in this hearing, we'll examine two of my proposals related to roads and national parks. National Park Service regulations currently state, quote, "Unless specifically addressed by regulations in this chapter, traffic and the use of vehicles within a park area are governed by state law," close quote. Unfortunately, spotty application of the regulation has led to inconsistent visitor experiences. While the Grand Canyon, Grand Teton, and Yellowstone National Parks defer to state law, some park units, including units in Utah, have banned certain motor vehicles from park roads when they're allowed elsewhere in the state under state law. To be clear, this would not allow off-roading in national parks, nothing of the sort. It would simply ensure that vehicles authorized by a state to operate on roads within that state could operate on roads within that state's national parks. Finally, I'd like to take a moment to speak in support of S-535, the Global War on Terrorism Memorial Location Act. This bill would create a Global War on Terror memorial on the National Mall at no cost to taxpayers. Thousands of men and women have volunteered to defend our nation in the wake of the attacks on September 11th, 2001. Nearly 20 years later, our service members are still answering the call of duty, despite uncertainty of when these enduring wars will finally come to an end. While a parcel of federal land will need to be designated to serve as the area for the memorial, in my view, the use of federal land for this purpose is appropriate and within the precedent set of memorializing the sacrifices of our fallen servicemen and women using the land of our National Mall. The creation of the Global War on Terrorism Memorial will honor the courage and commitment of our military members and their families, and will serve as a cautionary reminder of the human costs of endless wars for future generations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Lee. And on that note, we will turn to our next two witnesses. We're going to hear from two of our colleagues about the Global War on Terrorism Memorial Location Bill. I look forward to hearing about this. We have Senator Joni Ernst and my friend and Congressman from Maine, Jared Golden, two brave veterans who have served our country in uniform and here in the halls of Congress. Thank you both for your service. Senator Ernst.
Thank you, Chairman King and Ranking Member Daines, and thank you as well, Senator Lee, for your words of support and for you allowing me to speak at this hearing. I am honored to be here as an advocate for such an important piece of legislation. I ask for your consideration and support of my bipartisan effort to build a new memorial on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., to honor the troops who have served during the Global War on Terror. As the first female combat veteran to serve in the United States Senate, and as someone who has had her boots in the sand in Iraq and Kuwait, I know firsthand the sacrifices the millions of brave men and women of our armed forces made in defense of our nation and our freedom. We are approaching 2 decades after the attacks on September 11th. This direct assault on our nation sparked the global war on terrorism, a war that came at great personal cost to our men and women serving in the armed forces. This war changed the course of American history and the lives of millions of service members, military families, first responders, and civil servants, including my own. The global war on terrorism is the longest-running conflict in United States history. Our country should forever remember the sacrifices of these Americans who answered the call to wear our nation's uniform. Given the significance of and the magnitude of this sacrifice involved in operations in that conflict, it is appropriate to locate the National Global War on Terrorism Memorial alongside existing memorials to the major armed conflicts of the United States. That is why I sit before you today to ask that you honor our veterans by supporting my legislation, the Global War on Terrorism Memorial Location Act, to authorize the construction of this memorial on the reserve. While nothing will ever restore the lives that we have lost, this memorial would serve as a tribute to the brave men and women and their loved ones who have sacrificed in defense of our freedom. It will serve as a place of gathering with fellow brothers and sisters in arms, one post-9/11 veterans can call their own. It will serve as a commitment to the mothers and fathers who lost their whole world, a child, that this country is forever grateful and in their debt. It will serve as a place of healing for thousands of global war on terror veterans currently facing injuries of their own, seen and those that are unseen. Memorials have the power to heal, unite, and mean so many different things to different people through the form of art and permanent remembrance. For more than 20 years, I had the privilege of serving my state and country in uniform while working alongside some of our nation's finest soldiers. Like many others, I have raised my right hand and taken this oath voluntarily and without reservation, fully knowing that this is a conflict that is ongoing and a force that is the smallest this country has ever had in respect to our other wars. That is why the effort to build a global war on terrorism memorial is a personal one, not just to me, but to every service member, veteran, surviving family member, and civilian who was impacted by this fight. For the thousands of Americans who perished protecting our freedom, and the many others who were wounded or fought in the global war on terrorism, this memorial will forever honor their sacrifice to our great country. By locating the Global War on Terrorism Memorial alongside those honoring veterans of earlier conflicts, we're showing the men and women who've served in our nation's longest ongoing conflict that their sacrifice is equally valued. It will provide the veterans of this war an opportunity to visit the tribute to their selfless service and will provide a permanent place of reflection, of empowerment, and of healing in the heart of our nation's capital. We in Congress play a vital role in honoring our veterans and their heroic actions, and memorials such as this one are an important step to effectively recognize our veterans. I again ask the members of this subcommittee to support my mission to build a memorial to empower those who have answered the call to serve in the global war on terror, who for so long protected us while we enjoyed the freedoms that we still have to this day. We have the opportunity as a nation to unite around a common cause, the simple act of honoring the sacrifices of all who have served through a national global war on terrorism memorial. Its placement on the reserve is undoubtedly deserving. I'd like to close by thanking my partners in this effort, Senator Hassan, who joined me in introducing this legislation. I also want to thank the Honorable Jared Golden, colleague of Senator King in Maine, for joining to speak today, and the members of this subcommittee who are taking the time to consider this legislation. May God bless our beautiful country. May God bless our troops and their families. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Ernst, thank you for your moving statement today, but more especially for the service that you have rendered to this country. Thank you. Our next witness is Representative Jared Golden, Congressman from Maine's 2nd District, friend and colleague of Senator Collins and myself. Congressman Golden, welcome to the subcommittee.
Thank you, Senator. I want to first begin by saying that the passion and emotion that the Senator has put into her testimony, I believe to be representative of the same passion and emotions of many millions of veterans, families, and Gold Star families across this country. And I want to thank her on behalf of all of them for bringing forward this legislation to your committee. Chairman King, Ranking Member Daines, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss an issue of great importance, a Global War on Terrorism memorial on the National Mall in recognition of the 2.7 million Americans who have taken part in that mission since 9/11, and more importantly, to honor the more than 7,000 who have given their lives in service to this country. This memorial will provide veterans and their families, especially Gold Star families, a place in our Capitol for reflection and healing. In 2017, President Trump signed the bipartisan Global War on Terrorism War Memorial Act, authorizing the creation of a Global War on Terrorism Memorial and a foundation to oversee funding and construction of the project. I am here today on behalf of the Four Country Caucus, a bipartisan House caucus to express strong support for the final step necessary to authorize the construction of this memorial on the National Mall, S535, the Global War on Terrorism Memorial Location Act, and its companion in the House, H.R. 1115, introduced by Representatives Jason Crow and Mike Gallagher. I'm fortunate to serve as the co-chair of the Four Country Caucus, a team of veterans committed to working together in a nonpartisan way to create a more productive government. Each of our 25 members served honorably in the U.S. Armed Forces, with the majority serving after the September 11th attacks, including several of us who have fought in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Representative Crow and Gallagher are members of our caucus, and we deeply appreciate their leadership on this legislation, as do veterans across the country. The remaining question before Congress is not whether we should construct a memorial, but when and where to build it. We believe the answer is now, and on the reserve within the National Mall. We should follow the example set 40 years ago when Congress honored our Vietnam veterans with a memorial on the reserve, less than 2 decades after the beginning of that conflict, when President Carter signed it into law on July 1, 1980. The nation has witnessed the power of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial to bring together veterans of that war, their families, and fellow Americans to heal together and honor the fallen. We have a chance to do the same for our Global War on Terrorism veterans before this 20th anniversary of 9/11. The Global War on Terrorism is the only major military conflict in American history fought by an all-volunteer force. It is also the longest military conflict in our history, which means the personal impact of this war is multi-generational. Indeed, it is not uncommon for families to have had both a parent and a child serve deployments in this conflict. As our soldiers return from Afghanistan in the months ahead, now is the time to send a clear message that this nation will fully honor those who served in the global war on terrorism, and that we will never forget the many sacrifices that have been made. I understand you will receive testimony that the reserve is complete. You and I both know that no Congress can tie the hands of a future Congress. But more importantly, how could it be complete when the history of our nation is not? Others may argue the conflict is not significant enough to warrant a memorial. I've heard it said. In my opinion, after 9/11, 20 years of combat, tens of thousands wounded, and more than 7,000 killed in service, such a statement rings truly hollow in the ears of those who willingly carried the burden of our nation's security. Others may offer concerns about real estate or the cost to build it or maintain it. I only ask that you consider that if the many veterans that have sacrificed in this conflict, especially those who sacrificed their lives, or their families could testify before you about the value of this memorial or about its significance for not only themselves, but also for the country, such concerns would appear trivial at best. For us, this is a truly deeply personal matter. I'm grateful for the opportunity to testify before you today, and I offer the assistance of our caucus of veterans in the House to secure the passage of this bill into law. And thank you for this opportunity to join you today.
Congressman Golden, thank you so much. You were a veteran of Afghanistan, I know, and Senator Ernst, and I think we often don't think you mentioned you raised your hand and volunteered. When people do that, they are literally putting their lives on the line. They are saying, I am willing to sacrifice my life for my country. And the proposal you're making today clearly aligns with that supreme sacrifice that 7,000 made in this war. I want to thank you for joining us here today and for your powerful testimony. Thank you. We'll now have, I think we need to change the table and we'll have additional witnesses. Congressman Golden, the House is sort of over that way. So.
Always enjoy getting my fair share of a hard time from you, Senator King, but honestly, thank you so much.
We call them king-isms.
Well said. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll introduce our following witnesses. Michael Caldwell is the Acting Associate Director for the Park Planning, Facilities, and Lands at the National Park Service. Jennifer Eberline is the Associate Deputy Chief of the National Forest System at the Forest Service. Ms. Eberline previously served as the Deputy Regional Forester for the Pacific Southwest region and has more than 20 years of experience at the Forest Service at the Bureau of Land Management. Jennifer Hunter is a Mainer and a study coordinator for the York Wild and Scenic River Study Committee. Jennifer's worked with the study committee for the past 5.5 years. And Andrea Malmberg is a rancher from Union County, Oregon. She and her husband have run a direct-to-consumer grass-fed beef and lamb business for more than 20 years, and she also works as a rangeland consultant. Mr. Caldwell, your testimony, please.
Chairman King, Ranking Member Daines, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to present the Department of the Interior's views on the 15 bills on today's agenda. I would like to submit our full statements for the record and summarize the department's views. I am joined today remotely by Mark Lambrecht, Assistant Director, National Conservation Lands and Community Partnerships, Bureau of Land Management, who will be available to answer any BLM-related questions about S192, the River Democracy Act. S31 would bar the use of the Antiquities Act to extend or establish new national monuments in Utah unless authorized by Congress and the state legislature. The department strongly opposes this bill, as it would eliminate a critical tool available to protect objects of historic or scientific interest. S172 would authorize the National Medal of Honor Museum Foundation to establish a commemorative work in the District of Columbia. The department supports this bill. S192 would designate certain river segments in the state of Oregon as components of the National Wild and Scenic River System, including approximately 800 miles of rivers managed by the Bureau of Land Management. The department supports this bill. S270 would expand the Brown v. Board of Education National Historic Site. The department supports broadening public understanding of the events that led to this landmark U.S. Supreme Court decision, and we recommend amendments to the bill. S491 would designate segments of the York River in Maine as part of the National Wild and Scenic River System. The initial review indicates that the segments may be eligible for inclusion into the National Wild and Scenic River System, but we respectfully recommend that the committee defer action on S491 until the final report is issued, which we anticipate will occur in the near future. S535 would authorize the Global War on Terrorism Memorial to be located in the area known as the Reserve, the area that encompasses the National Mall. We understand the desire to build this memorial in a specific location. However, the department does not support this bill. S753 would reauthorize the Highlands Conservation Act, a grant program managed by the Fish and Wildlife Service to protect natural resources in 4 northeastern states. The department supports this bill. S1317 would transfer 97 acres of land administered by the U.S. Forest Service to Sunset Crater Volcano National Monument. The department supports this bill. S1320 would redesignate the Chiricahua National Monument as Chiricahua National Park. The department supports this bill. S1321 would authorize the addition of 406 acres of land to Casa Grande Ruins National Monument and transfer administration of some lands among departmental bureaus. The department supports this bill. S1354 would designate the Chilkoot as a National Historic Trail and provide for a study of the Alaska Long Trail. The department supports the designation for the Chilkoot and supports, with an amendment, the study of the Alaska Long Trail. S1526 would authorize the use of off-highway vehicle in certain areas of Capitol Reef National Park. The department strongly opposes this bill, as this legislation would likely result in damage to sensitive natural resources. S1527 would require that state law apply to the use of motor vehicles on roads within the national park system. The department strongly opposes this bill, as it would undermine the National Park Service's ability to protect visitors and park resources. S1769 would adjust the boundary of Santa Monica Mountain National Recreation Area to include lands in the rim of the valley corridor. The department supports this bill, but would like to revisit the proposed boundary with the bill's sponsor and the committee. S1771 would authorize reference to the museum located in Blytheville, Arkansas, as the National Cold War Center. The department defers to the Department of Defense for a position on this bill. We would be happy to work with the committee on all the bills where we have recommended amendments. Chairman King, this concludes my statement. Assistant Director Lambrecht and I would be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. We'll move on to the other witnesses, then we'll do questioning of each witness. Our next witness is Jennifer Eberlein of the National Forest System at the Forest Service.
Good morning, Chairman King, Ranking Member Daines, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to present the U.S. Department of Agriculture views on S192 River Democracy Act of 2021 and S1317 Sunset Volcano Crater National Monument Boundary Adjustment Act. Our national forests and grasslands offer some of the most readily available and valuable outdoor recreation settings in the country. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Americans turned to their public lands for respite and relaxation in greater numbers than at any other time in recent history. The number of recreation visits to the National Forest System rose to over 168 million in 2020, an increase of over 12% compared to 2019. In addition to accessing a wide array of land-based recreational activities, others found restorative water-based experiences through enjoyment of rivers and streams, including designated wild and scenic rivers. The Wild and Scenic Rivers Act protects more than 13,400 miles of rivers and streams in the United States for the benefit and enjoyment of present and future generations. Designation as a wild and scenic river is our nation's strongest form of protection for free-flowing rivers and streams, many of which serve as important drinking water sources for communities. They have outstandingly remarkable scenic, recreational, geologic, fish and wildlife, historic, cultural, or other similar values that led Congress to add these waterways to the National Wild and Scenic Rivers System. The River Democracy Act of 2021, under consideration today, would significantly expand the amount of river miles included in this national system in the state of Oregon. Just as the pandemic significantly increased visitation to the national forests and our wild and scenic rivers, I'm quite certain Sunset Crater in Arizona experienced significant visitation over the last year too. S1317 Sunset Volcano Crater National Monument Boundary Adjustment Act will ensure the National Park Service can seamlessly administer that recreational opportunity. The boundary adjustment will help both federal agencies going forward. I look forward to discussing how we can support these bills to ensure the public can continue to turn to these valued federal assets. The Forest Service supports wild and scenic rivers designations in alignment with a variety of factors, including ensuring any new designations are properly integrated into the National Wild and Scenic Rivers System, with enough time to develop comprehensive river management plans and to establish detailed boundaries in cooperation with tribes, state, and local governments and interested public stakeholders. We would welcome the opportunity to work with the subcommittee and bill sponsors to clarify several aspects of S192 River Democracy of 2021 Act, including the intent associated with the requirements for developing fire management plans and culturally significant native species management plans, and explore options for achieving intended outcomes. S192 would designate an estimated 3,000 plus miles that flow through National Forest System lands. We defer to the Department of the Interior on portions of the bill pertaining to that department. As a former resident of Flagstaff, Arizona, I made numerous visits to the Sunset Crater, and I can actually see the location of the proposed boundary adjustment. This boundary adjustment, as proposed in S1317 Sunset Volcano Crater National Monument Boundary Adjustment Act, is one of the Forest Service supports and has previously testified in support of. The adjustment includes approximately 98 acres of identified National Forest System land immediately adjacent to the monument. The bill transfers administrative jurisdiction over the land from the Forest Service to the National Park Service. Historically, the Forest Service and National Park Service coordinated through an interagency agreement where any ground disturbing activity in the administrative area requires prior approval by the Forest Service. The proposed boundary adjustment would eliminate this requirement, thus removing a significant compliance burden for both agencies. The adjustment will allow better management of natural resources and topographic features that pertain to the monument, provide clear jurisdiction to better serve the public, and provide a stronger basis for cooperation between the two agencies. In conclusion, our outdoor recreation provides millions of Americans rich opportunities to connect with their lands and wild and scenic rivers. The Forest Service is honored to serve this vital link and appreciates the opportunity to provide testimony on these two bills. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Eberlein, for your testimony. And now Jennifer Hunter, who was a study coordinator for the York River Wild and Scenic Study Committee. Ms. Hunter.
Thank you, Chairman King, Ranking Member Daines, and members of the subcommittee. I'm Jennifer Hunter from York, Maine. I've been coordinator for the York River Wild and Scenic Study for the last 5.5 years. York River is a coastal river in southern Maine with watershed lands in Elliott, Kittery, South Berwick, and York. I am speaking on behalf of the York River Wild and Scenic Study Committee in support of Senate Bill 491, which aims to designate 30.8 miles of York River and its major tributaries into the National Wild and Scenic Rivers System. Our local Wild and Scenic River Study was authorized by Congress in December 2014 and conducted over a 3-year period. With expert input and community engagement throughout the process, our study committee evaluated York River's eligibility and suitability for a wild and scenic river designation using the partnership model typical for rivers that flow through non-federal lands. Of the 226 rivers in the National Wild and Scenic Rivers System, 16 are partnership wild and scenic rivers. Our study confirmed that York River is an excellent candidate for designation. The river miles proposed for designation are free-flowing with good water quality. There is no shortage of river-related, outstandingly remarkable values that serve as the basis for designation. Our relatively small coastal watershed has over 100 documented archaeological sites, including Native American sites dating back thousands of years and early colonial sites, such as the first tidal mill dam in the English colonies built in 1634. The 1,700-acre area surrounding York Harbor and the lower York River is a National Register Historic District. There are 8 individual sites listed in the National Register of Historic Places. Sewell's Bridge, which was America's first wooden pile drawbridge and is now a National Engineering Landmark, spans the river. There is an active working waterfront that is important to our economy and community's character. The watershed supplies clean drinking water to residents and to the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. State and regional assessments characterize the York River system as exemplary for its ecological significance, water quality, watershed resilience, and healthy salt marsh habitats. It is one of the most biodiverse areas in Maine and is home to more endangered and threatened species than any other area in the state. Clearly, we have a special river ecosystem. However, there are threats. The York River watershed is a fast-growing area with concerns of overuse and development impacts potentially affecting water quality and natural habitats. As a coastal watershed, it is subject to rising seas, warmer water and air temperatures, and more intense storms. Proactive stewardship is needed now more than ever to preserve the river for current and future generations. A culminating product of our study was development of the York River Watershed Stewardship Plan that can help guide long-term river resource preservation. For our study, we also made sure that designation and inclusion in the national program is a good fit for the river and our communities. We concluded it is. Designation will provide technical assistance, financial support, and a 4-community coalition to discuss river stewardship issues and take action based on local priorities and needs. The partnership model for designation maintains local control of land use and river management. A partnership wild and scenic river designation will bolster community-led river stewardship efforts and enable sustained actions to preserve York River. There is widespread local support for partnership wild and scenic river designation. In late 2018, voters in Elliott and York and town councils in Kittery and South Berwick overwhelmingly approved warrant articles and resolutions to designate York River and approve the York River Watershed Stewardship Plan. Over 24 community groups wrote letters endorsing river designation. Our Wild and Scenic River study process, which began 12 years ago, demonstrated a commitment to river stewardship among our 4 towns, conservation organizations, civic groups, landowners, river users, local and state agencies, and the National Park Service. We look forward to York River becoming a partnership river in our national wild and scenic river system so that we can continue our cooperative efforts. I thank you for your interest and your support.
Thank you for your testimony, and we will now hear from Andrea Malmberg from Union County, Oregon. Ms. Malmberg, welcome.
Mr. Chairman, just very briefly, and Senator Daines, I won't take the Finance Committee tradition of long introductions, but we especially appreciate Ms. Malmberg being up early at home. She ranches cattle in Union, Oregon, and we're thrilled to have her.
Thank you, Chairman King, Ranking Member Daines, and subcommittee members. Again, my name is Andrea Malmberg, and I am a rancher in Union, Oregon. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you about an important bill before you, the River Democracy Act of 2021. I was raised and have lived on the land with livestock my whole life. First as a daughter of a cattle buyer in Montana and South Dakota, and as an adult, a ranch owner and land steward in Wyoming and now in Oregon. I hold degrees in agriculture and natural resources from Washington State University, and seeing the need to bring the tools of human flourishing to rural communities, I received a master's in applied positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania, and have been sharing ways for people in agriculture primarily to enhance their well-being. My husband and I are longtime members of the Farm Bureau, the Wyoming Stock Growers, and the Oregon Cattlemen's Association. In 1998, we were honored to receive a National Cattlemen's Beef Association's Environmental Stewardship Award. We have demonstrated that ecological health and profitable livestock production is not a zero-sum game. The land bases we have influenced have empirical data to prove up. True and enduring profitability can be realized when we regenerate land and water resources. I'm specifically speaking to you today as a citizen of Union County, Oregon. For those of you who aren't familiar with this beautiful place, we have just under 27,000 residents and likely have more livestock than people. For context, my county is twice the size of Rhode Island and larger than Delaware. It is about half privately owned, divided between forest, rangeland, and irrigated pasture and crops. The other half is primarily national forest. Many of the streams in Union County still have salmon, steelhead, or bull trout populations. And while some wildlife is abundant, much of our biodiversity is declining. This is a clear connection between ecological degeneration on both private and public lands and the lack of vitality to our economies in our region. I think that the River Democracy Act of 2021 gives us a leg up to build resiliency in the natural resources in which we all depend. My business relies on water that flows from our national forest lands for my livestock and livelihood. I produce forage by utilizing the water from Catherine Creek and Little Creek, tributaries of the larger Grand Ronde River. These smaller streams are critical for my ranching business and essential to the health of the Grand Ronde River watershed, its wildlife, fisheries, and economies. Moreover, my hometown of Union's water quality, infrastructure, and economy depend on what happens upstream, whether the waterway is on private or federal lands. We all rely on the flows from the headwaters. If we continue neglecting our floodplain's health, fires and flooding will further erode infrastructure and threaten our livelihoods. Windblown trees and ice jams are already threatening the city of Union due to channelization and outdated infrastructure that disconnects rivers from their floodplains. Imagine what would happen if a fire overtook our forest lands, leaving little bare ground cover to slow snowpack melting. Fire has always been a natural force and a land management tool used by people for millennia, but we are in a new era. Now we are faced with massive wildfires having severe impact on forests, clean water, and our communities. With the fire management tools offered in the Act, we are less likely to see huge amounts of sediment choking creeks, flooding our private properties, and silting irrigation systems. The more we can appreciate the value of and our dependence on the health of the network of streams and rivers in my corner of the state, the better off we will all be. That is why when Senator Wyden and Merkley announced a public process to consider conservation of rivers on public lands in Oregon, I really was excited. As someone who has been a professional, locally based consensus building facilitator on thorny natural resource issues, it is highly unusual for politicians to ask you what they think before they do something. Their willingness to listen to Oregonians continues even now that the bill has been introduced. This is how democracy is supposed to work, and I am proud to say that it is the Oregon way. I strongly support the balanced approach that Senator Wyden and Merkley have employed through the development of the River Democracy Act. Through this bill, we have an opportunity to build resilience downstream by restoring the waterways upstream, protecting and enhancing the value of private property and water rights along the way. Thank you again for this opportunity to testify.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Now we will have questions of the witnesses with a 5-minute round from the panel. Ms. Hunter, first question for you. You heard Senator Daines at the beginning talk about the importance of local support for these kinds of designations. And you mentioned this in your testimony, but could you elaborate a bit on the outreach that was done along the river in terms of both the communities and private landowners on the York River?
Yes, thank you. I'd be happy to. That was a goal of the York River Study Committee, was to engage the community throughout this process. We held over 60 public meetings throughout our process. We held a number of watershed events, including watershed walks along the river, so we could discuss different river resources. We attended any public event we were able to, including local fairs, festivals, and meetings of the Rotary and other civic groups. We had several mailings that went to all the river landowners to inform them of upcoming meetings and our activities. We had several projects that were conducted in the field, and we invited citizen scientists to take part in those projects so that they could understand the resources and provide feedback to us and what was valuable to them.
And as I understand it, there were several referenda in 2 of the towns that were overwhelmingly positive. Is that correct?
That's correct. Part of the demonstration of suitability for a partnership designation includes town votes to endorse designation, as well as accept our locally developed stewardship plan. The towns of York and Elliott had warrant articles on the ballot in November 2018. And the towns of Kittery and South Berwick had council votes on a resolution. And in the towns of York and Elliott, the measures were overwhelmingly approved by voters, by 63% in one town and 73% in another town. In the case of the council votes, they were all unanimous in support of designation.
Thank you. Mr. Caldwell, you testified that the department is withholding its endorsement of this bill pending the final report. I would point out that what we thought was the final report was submitted in March of 2020, 14 months ago. Eisenhower retook Europe in 11 months. Define near future. You testified we would get the final report in the near future.
Senator King, thank you very much. And I certainly want to compliment the local interest of the York River study and the work of partners like Ms. Hunter. It's what makes a difference all across the country. The department is in its final stages of review. We expect departmental action as very quickly, imminently, and we are certainly monitoring its progress through the review process.
Well, this committee will be considering these bills in the immediate future in terms of the markup. So I would hope that the department, you've said near future, imminently, and quickly. So I hope we're measuring that in weeks and not months. I urge you to get this material to us because we want to have the input of the department when we act on this bill.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
The terrorism memorial, you heard the moving testimony of the two witnesses earlier, and the issue seems to not be, should there be a memorial, but whether it should be on the mall. Could you expand upon the policy decision in terms of future memorials on the mall, and is that, give us some rationale for that decision?
Yes, Senator, and certainly the Department of Interior supports veterans of all wars, and this certainly isn't about the act of remembrance. It is about the S-535 would allow the Global War of Terrorism Memorial to be located in the area identified as the Reserve under the Commemorative Works Act of 1986. Congress amended that act in 2003, establishing the Reserve and declaring it a complete work of civic art, where the citing of new commemorative work is prohibited. So since the establishment of the Reserve, no new memorials have been placed on the National Mall. Only improvements to existing memorials, such as plaques, have been granted.
So this was a congressional decision, and as Congressman Golden testified, Congress could change that designation if they chose. Is the concern is that the mall is getting crowded? Is that what the issue is?
I think in terms of the congressional action in 2003, after receiving several requests for the placement of memorials on the National Mall at that time, Congress recognized the need to preserve the L'Enfant Plan, the Macmillan Plan of the National Mall for the capital city, and prevent the mall area from being overbuilt. So it addressed this need by creating a new reserve area or a no-build zone on the National Mall. And in 2003, Congress amended the Commemorative Works Act to prohibit the establishment of new memorials in the reserve.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Senator.
Daines.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, Mr. Chairman, my office has received a number of support and opposition letters on some 15 bills on today's agenda, and I ask unanimous consent to be included in the record.
Without objection.
Mr. Caldwell, it's my understanding that Senate Bill 1771, recognizing the National Cold War Center, does not require any new congressionally authorized funds to implement. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're deferring to the Department of Defense on a position on the Cold War Center.
But there's no congressionally authorized funds?
As we understand that.
Okay,
That's correct,
thank you.
sir.
What's unique about this museum?
Once again, I would defer to the Department of Defense in terms of the uniqueness of this particular museum. Certainly the National Park Service at a number of sites interprets the important history of the Cold War across the country, and we certainly cooperate with different museums and institutions such as may be proposed here.
Mr. Caldwell, another question. We have two bills on the agenda that would establish a commemorative work in D.C. Our existing commemorative works, like the Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument, and our Vietnam, Korea, World War II, and World War I memorials, help honor and tell the story of America. Could you briefly describe the process that Senate Bill 172 and Senate Bill 535 will have to follow if they're signed into law?
Yes, Senator. The Medal of Honor Memorial, once authorized for the MPS, guides the memorial sponsor, the National Park Service, guides the memorial sponsor through site location, design, and construction process. The Commission on Fine Arts and the National Capital Planning Commission must review and approve the site and the design selection. So the National Park Service would be happy to discuss the specific elements of this process of the site selection and the design approval with you or members of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. Before I turn to Ms. Eberline, I want to commend you. I'm getting good feedback from our park superintendents about the work you're doing to implement the Great America Outdoors Act, which I know we're very grateful that we had that bipartisan, one of the greatest conservation achievements in 50 years passed last year. Thank you for your help in moving that forward.
Thank you for your support, sir.
Ms. Eberline, as we noted, Senate Bill 192 would designate about 4,700 miles of new wild and scenic rivers in Oregon. Could you briefly describe the local support as well as the opposition you've heard related to the bill?
Thank you for the question, Senator. And as with any type of proposed designation such as this, there are interests on all sides of the issue.
Are all the rivers proposed in the bill located completely in Oregon, or do any border enter another state?
The majority of the designations are in Oregon, with a small portion of some of the proposed rivers stretching into Northern California and Northern Nevada.
Okay, thank you. And I've not yet seen a map. Do you know when the Forest Service would provide this committee with an accurate map?
We would be happy to work with the subcommittee and the bill sponsors to provide a map as a follow-up to this.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, yield back to you.
Thank you. Senator Wyden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to thank my constituent, Ms. Malmberg, for getting up early at home. She is a rancher who grew up in the West. She's won awards from the National Cattlemen. Her county is more than 50% in public ownership. And colleagues, she felt and stated specifically that there was a fulsome opportunity, a complete opportunity for people to weigh in, and that people continue to have that chance to weigh in with their views on the River Democracy Act. And I just want to say thanks, Ms. Malmberg, for that to get us started, because throwing open the doors of government, in my view, is a prime responsibility for a Western senator, and I thank you for your gracious comments. My question to you, particularly with your ranching background, is to get your thoughts on the record with respect to the bill and ensuring that it takes the appropriate steps to reduce wildfire risk, protect private property, and ensure access to grazing. Can you just touch on those? Wildfire risk, protecting private property, access to grazing.
Yes, thank you, Senator. I think that what is most important is, as we saw last year in Oregon and throughout the West, catastrophic fires, and really feeling, I believe, that we were not prepared. I am a livestock advocate, and I know that livestock can do wonderful things for managing the understory of our forests and our grasslands. And so I really believe that hand in hand, we have livestock production that's happening on our national forest through permits, that we could actually use the ranchers and the permits to really create a comprehensive river management plan and really assess and look at what we can do to stop the catastrophic events of fire that we have seen in the West.
And the private property protection language and the grazing protection language, in your view, is adequate as well?
Yes, I do believe so. And, so my irrigation water, even though I'm obviously on private land, comes from upstream. And so being able to ensure that the headwaters of Catherine Creek and Little Creek will continue to, I have adequate water for irrigating. And so I feel like being able to protect those headwaters really is protecting my private water rights.
Very good. Ms. Eberline, thank you for your comments. And I want to make clear the agency's position with respect to how we're dealing with wildfire. In writing the River Democracy Act, we wanted to make sure that land conservation efforts do not hinder the ability of public lands managers to respond to wildfires. In your view, does this give agencies the sufficient flexibility to mitigate fire risk and respond to wildfires and help restore watersheds and infrastructure should a fire strike?
Thank you, Senator. The proposed bill takes into account management needs for preparing for, responding to, and to wildfire and the fire restoration needs post-fire.
And so it gives you the flexibility that is key for an agency. Is that correct? I understand that you all feel that the flexibility is there for you all to carry out your important responsibilities.
Yes, it does.
Very, very good. So the final question I have, now that we've established that the bill gives you the flexibility to deal with fire risk, is we've been working with cattle and ranching families across Oregon who want to make sure that grazing is compatible with wild and scenic rivers designation. Can you walk us through so we can make sure that the wild and scenic river designations give land managers the flexibility to work with ranchers to keep livestock in a wild and scenic river corridor?
Yes, thank you, Senator. The grazing is allowed in wild and scenic river corridors. There is flexibility to work with ranchers and permit holders to keep their cattle on the landscape, as well as meet the values of the wild and scenic river designations.
Very good. My time has expired. I just want to say to colleagues that I'm particularly appreciative of both our witnesses. Ms. Malmberg, more than 3,000 miles away, has described how the River Democracy Act works for her and her community in a very forthright way. And Ms. Eberlein, I particularly appreciate your outlining your views that the proposed law gives the agencies the flexibility to mitigate fire risks and also protect grazing. In concluding, Mr. Chairman, I would ask unanimous consent to enter letters from Oregonians into the record. Now, colleagues, and I'll make this very short, the number of supportive letters for the River Democracy Act far outnumbers the letters from those opposed. But I would like to note that all the letters that I am entering into the record are from Oregonians who deserve to have their views heard and considered. That's what the Oregon Way is all about. And I want to make sure that the letters citing concerns as well as those that are supportive be entered into the record as well this morning.
Without objection. Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Mr. Caldwell, I'd like to start with you. I want to talk about national monuments for a minute. President Obama's proclamation creating the Bears Ears National Monument states that it was meant to preserve traces of ancient human life, including baskets, pottery, petroglyphs, weapons, and more. I've got a lot of material I want to cover, so on some of them I'm going to ask for a yes or no question, if you can answer to my question if you can. Are these types of objects, namely baskets, petroglyphs, weapons, and so forth, are they protected by the Archaeological Resources Protection Act and the Native American Graves Repatriation Act?
Senator, I'd have to get back with you with that specific answer on the.
Okay, thank you. The answer there, by the way, is yes. Now, President Obama's Bears Ears proclamation also cites the presence of the Mexican spotted owl, the southwestern willow flycatcher, and other species as additional reasons for the designation. Are those species and their habitats protected by the Endangered Species Act?
Once again, I would get back to the committee on your question.
And they are. President Obama's Bears Ears proclamation also cites the presence of big sagebrush as a reason for the designation. Do you know in which states the big sagebrush naturally occurs?
Specifically, I do not, but we can certainly reply to you and reply to the committee.
Big sagebrush can be found in Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, South Dakota, North Dakota, Nebraska, and Utah. So, from your answers, and from the basis from which I've drawn those questions, it seems like the Antiquities Act is being used as a guise of protection, but in reality, it's been used for political gain. It's despicable that despite archaeological treasures and species having their own protections under other laws, administrations have used Antiquities Act proclamations and designations to feed this sentiment that fakes the dire pressing need for expansive national monuments. It creates this false binary choice between, do you want this national monument, or do you want to disregard all of these treasures that will otherwise be devastated? These are interests that are already protected by other federal laws, and I think it's laughable that an administration would cite the presence of a species so ubiquitous and massive as big sagebrush to justify a national monument. When a massive monument like those in Utah is designated, entire economies can be uprooted. This power has been abused with respect to my state and others. Some members of this committee represent states that have been exempted from unilateral presidential designations of national monuments under the Antiquities Act. And I think it's time that Congress review the Antiquities Act for that very reason. Now, it's not just people in this branch of government that see the need for this. Recently, Chief Justice John Roberts stated that, specifically in reference to the Antiquities Act, that, quote, a statute permitting the president in his sole discretion to designate as monuments landmarks, structures, and objects, along with the smallest area of land compatible with their management, has been transformed into a power without any discernible limit to set aside vast and amorphous expanses of terrain above and below the sea. Does Chief Justice Roberts make a fair point that national monuments have exceeded their statutory limits? Yeah, and I'm going to ask for a yes or no question there.
Sir, I haven't read that Chief Justice's opinion, so I'll have to defer.
Okay. I think it's important for anyone in the administration who deals with these issues in public lands really ought to read them. And I think anyone who, after reading those statements, anyone who can't commit to a yes or a no response to such a question, and the possibility that that the Antiquities Act has been abused, I think that would be very troubling if they couldn't commit to that. In my opinion, an inconclusive answer in response to that would mean that the Antiquities Act is, in fact, something that's become a political football, something that's been used in many, many cases by presidents of one party to go after states that have not supported members of that party that happen to have a lot of federal public land, turning our states into virtual piñatas where the president's own base responds with loud applause every time that president acts, even to the detriment of the local communities. I see my time's expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to begin by thanking you and Ranking Member Daines for holding today's hearing on legislation that Senator Sinema and I introduced to enhance 3 national monuments in Arizona. Our bills span our incredible state. One monument, Sunset Crater Volcano National Monument, is located in northern Arizona. The other, Casa Grande Ruins National Monument, is in central Arizona, and the third, the Chiricahua National Monument, is in southern Arizona. When most Americans think about their national parks, they envision world-famous attractions like Grand Canyon or Yellowstone. But national monuments are just as important for admiring geologic wonders and protecting the legacy of indigenous cultures. National monuments also attract tourists, which support jobs and economic growth in rural communities. Our 3 bills would ensure the continued enjoyment of these special places for future generations of Arizonans. Sunset Crater is a volcano that last erupted
only about 1,000 years ago and is just outside of Flagstaff. Our legislation would adjust its boundaries to make it easier to maintain the entrance road and a visitor center that hosts 200,000 people annually. The Casa Grande Ruins National Monument Boundary Adjustment Act would allow the Park Service to preserve land containing archaeological discoveries dating back to the 14th century that belonged to the ancient Hohokam people. The Hohokam were builders of a vast canal system along the Gila River, which was later reestablished in the 1860s by pioneers who named the place Phoenix. The last bill, the Chiricahua National Park Act, would rename the Chiricahua National Monument as a national park. This would be Arizona's fourth national park. I have letters from several communities in southeastern Arizona supporting this bill, and they're excited. They're very excited for the visitors that a park would attract. I also have a letter from the San Carlos Apache tribe that wants to ensure the legislation would not open the park to mining or impact visitation by tribal members. So, Mr. Chairman, I ask for unanimous consent that those letters be added to the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Caldwell, thank you for your testimony today. I only have a few questions for you. Under your interpretation, would this bill establishing Chiricahua National Park open the park to mining or change your agency's obligation to provide tribal members access to this site?
Well, the MPS requirements to consult with local communities and tribes in the management of the national park would not change with the nomenclature designation being changed.
But would it open the park to mining?
Not to my knowledge, sir.
Thank you. Would the Sunset Crater bill help the Park Service improve the visitor experience at the monument?
Yes, it would. I think with the bill there, as we've supported it, it would certainly assist the National Park Service in providing a more efficient visitor service and experience.
And would you briefly describe in the remaining time some of the archaeological resources that the Casa Grande Ruins bill would be protecting?
Yes, Senator. The sensitive and significant resources this bill would protect include a prehistoric canal, above-ground prehistoric standing ruins, a platform mound, a compound wall, and a prehistoric ball court. There are numerous archaeological sites there that exist on these parcels, and this certainly, the preservation of these resources would be our mission there. An incredible resource there.
Thank you, Mr. Caldwell.
Thank you, sir.
And Mr. Chairman, I yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank you. I have visited Casa Grande and the Chiricahua, so I can attest to their beauty and powerful impact on anyone who visits there. Senator Hoeven.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My questions, Mr. Caldwell, relate to legislation that's being offered, both the Global War on Terrorism Memorial Location Act and the Medal of Honor Commemorative Work Act. And so I guess really my question to you are, what are some of the logistical challenges in terms of as it relates to our mall if we are able to move forward with those with that legislation and then actually establish those memorials? Have you started any kind of planning process, or do you have some kind of planning process for new memorials?
Sure, we have an active planning role with our regional office. We work with once a memorial is authorized, we work with those groups and discuss the processes that need to happen for monuments and memorials to take place in Washington, D.C. And we certainly would welcome an opportunity to brief committee staff on those specific steps. But we do have an active role in working with partners. World War I Memorial just opened up at Pershing Park. A long history of the National Park Service working with groups.
Do you actually have a site plan anticipating additional memorials, or not? I mean, do
I-
you do it
I
ad
would-
hoc, or do you actually
yeah.
have kind of a development or a
I-
site plan?
Sure, I would defer to our national capital area for that, for a briefing at what is laid out for the reserve area as well as Area 1, which is adjacent to the National Mall.
And then how about concepts? How do you develop concepts, whether it would be more relative to the global war on terror or relative to our Medal of Honor winners? Conceptually, how do you go about developing those?
We work with, as we do across the country, with community groups, nonprofit groups that have been created for the establishment of these memorials and monuments. So we interact with them, go through the process, go over the planning requirements, the requirements of the National Commission, those types of things that need to take place here for those memorials. And we'd be happy to review those specifics of that with you and other members of the committee.
Do you have specific recommendations regarding either one of those, the Global War on Terror or the Medal of Honor proposals?
Sure. The department, in terms of the monument placement on the reserve, we do not support the monument placement on the reserve for the Global War on Terror. For the Medal of Honor commemorative work, we would welcome the opportunity to work with the group, both identifying locations as well as design and the elements that go into producing them.
I'm sorry, in regard to the Global War on Terror, you say you don't support what aspect of it?
The location on the reserve area of the National Mall.
So you would have alternative locations identified?
What we would do is work with the group that is working on creating the monument if it was passed, and go over different areas, different locations, based on our experience in the national capital area on that. So we would review potential areas.
And in regard to the Medal of Honor memorial?
We would do the same thing with the commemorative works for the Medal of Honor, and go over different options available to the folks that are working to establish that.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank you, Mr.
Senator.
Chairman.
Further questions? Mr. Caldwell and our other witnesses, thank you so much for joining us from Oregon early in the morning. From Maine, we appreciate your testimony and the work, and also from the Forest Service. So thank you all for your testimony here today. We will be working on these bills in the very near future, and I appreciate the input. If there's additional, I think we've got a deadline of some members of the committee may submit additional questions in writing. And I would ask our witnesses to submit their answers for the record. Committee members will have until 6 p.m. tomorrow to submit additional questions for the record. We will keep the hearing record open for 2 weeks to receive any additional comments. The subcommittee hearing is adjourned.
Thank you, sir.